the other side. Stay tuned on NewsX World.
Hello and welcome to NewsX World. For this very special interview,
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. U.S. Presidential Envoy Steve Witkoff will lead a delegation to join Gaza ceasefire and hostage talks in Egypt on Wednesday, according to Egyptian Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati. Meanwhile, Qatar's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari has criticized Israel for failing to halt operations in Gaza as outlined in U.S. President Donald Trump's peace plan. Indirect talks between Israel and Hamas in Egypt have been described as positive by sources close to the Palestinian militants' negotiating team. With the first round lasting 4 hours, the world is eyeing for a lasting deal to end the 2-year war that followed the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack that has killed many Palestinians, according to Gaza Health Ministry. A Ukrainian drone strike has killed 4 civilians on a highway in the Russia-occupied part of Kherson, according to Moscow-appointed Governor Vladimir Saldo, who reported the attack targeted civilian vehicles. This comes amid escalating strikes, with Russia reporting it has intercepted 209 Ukrainian drones overnight in Kursk, Nizhny Novgorod, and Belgorod, according to the Russian Defense Ministry. France's outgoing Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu begins last-ditch talks to save his cabinet after resigning on Monday following rejection by allies and opponents. President Emmanuel Macron has tasked Lecornu with rallying cross-party support amid a fractured parliament. India's air safety regulator has requested details from Boeing following an emergency power system glitch on an Air India 787 Dreamliner during final approach from India to Birmingham, according to Air India statements. This incident comes months after a deadly July crash of a Boeing 787 that has killed 260 people. Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara has reportedly met with Kurdish leader Mazloum Abdi in Aleppo, marking their first meeting since July following deadly clashes in Kurdish-majority districts. The meeting was also attended by U.S. envoys Tom Barak and Admiral Ed Brad Cooper, focused on the stalled implementation of a March agreement. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is traveling to Washington for his second visit this year to restart stalled trade talks with U.S. President Donald Trump, with Canada the only G7 nation yet to secure a trade deal this year, as Carney now faces pressure to secure a deal. John Clark, Michelle H. Deverett, and John M. Martins have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for their groundbreaking work in quantum technologies. Their contributions have advanced the development of quantum computing, marking a major milestone in modern physics. Now we move on. In Moscow, Russia has expressed concerns over the potential U.S. supply of Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, emphasizing that the long-range weapons are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said that Moscow is awaiting clearer statements from Washington. Let's listen in.
Ну, мы так понимаем, что нужно дождаться, наверное, более четких заявлений, если они последуют. Если они последуют, я еще раз повторяю, если что касается поставок вооружения, сначала они происходят, а потом звучат уже заявления. А по крайней мере, так всегда было при администрации Байдена. Нам это хорошо известно. Как на этот раз посмотрим, но что касается позиции Москвы, она была весьма недвусмысленно изложена президентом Путиным на недавнем встрече в рамках дискуссионного клуба «Валдай». Там все четко было сказано, это будет серьезный виток эскалации, который вместе с тем не сможет поменять положение дел на фронтах для киевского режима.
Trump has said that he would first want to understand Ukraine's intentions before approving the transfer, citing concerns over escalating the war. President Vladimir Putin has warned that such a move could destroy diplomatic ties with the United States. Tomahawk missiles with a range of up to 2,500 kilometers could enable Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory. Now, for this discussion, we're joined by Professor Georgi Toloraya. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Moscow. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this news, looking at this news coming in, how do you assess the current state of U.S. and Russia relations?
Well, the state of Russian relations is far from what we desired just a couple of weeks ago after the Alaska summit. It's sort of in limbo, not much is going on. The dialogue on the diplomatic compounds and diplomatic function of diplomatic premises are paralyzed. There's nothing going on there. There are very little contacts, so there's not much causes for joy. And especially this news about Tomahawk possible supply to Ukraine is very concerning. It's causes a lot of bad feelings. It can really disrupt the dialogue because this is a qualitative escalation of the conflict. As was mentioned by you, these missiles are nuclear capable. So if they start off, no one knows, but it might carry a nuclear warhead. And they cannot be launched without U.S. direct guidance and the participation of U.S. citizens, U.S. servicemen. So that means another level of escalation. And also they're quite powerful. So they can be concentrated for some demonstrative strikes, like, for example, the strike for the Crimea bridge or something like this, or on Moscow proper. So this is very disturbing because the reply will immediately follow, and it will be a strong reply. So I do believe that President Trump is just considering this option very carefully, and what he says is just another leverage of pressure to his Russian negotiation counterparts, not the actual plan to be implemented, but we shall wait and see because all the signals have been sent already.
And Professor Toloraya, some of our guests are saying that U.S. is warming up or towards Ukraine. What's your analysis? How do you see President Trump's shift in policy towards Ukraine, and how do you see it affecting NATO's unity and its strategic approach to the conflict with Russia?
Unfortunately, President Trump has under great pressure from outside, especially from Europe. And European politics towards the conflict and towards Russia cannot be really called rational. Ukrainians are doing things like last night they attacked another nuclear power plant in Voronezh, Novovoronezh nuclear power plant. You should be really crazy to attack a nuclear station, which, if damaged, can contaminate not only Ukraine but all of Europe. And this is something really, to say, put it mildly, unreasonable. And this is being supported by Europe, and President Trump is getting much pressure from them. So I think it's a very worrisome development, and something should be done about this. But I don't know what else should happen to make President Trump to be more decisive in pursuing his goal of setting up peace, which he declared is his goal.
Yes, indeed. And now looking at the news that has come in yesterday with the confirmation that Ukraine used their domestically made missiles in recent strikes on Russian infrastructure, how does this reflect Ukraine's growing self-reliance in defense? And what do you think, what were they suggesting when they announced it?
Well, I'm not a military expert, so I cannot testify if this information is correct. But also there's so much money being poured into Ukraine, and Ukraine used to have quite a good military industrial potential in Soviet times, so they obviously can do something. But the result is that the conflict is going on, and it's escalating, and it's deepening, and it doesn't have any good consequence for anybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Georgi, for sharing that insight. And please stay with us as we come back to you, and now we stay on this topic. The Kremlin promises Russia will respond to EU's restrictions on the movement of Moscow's diplomats. EU bloc countries are moving towards a deal that would force Russian diplomats to notify member states before traveling, letting the governments to deny entry. As per EU diplomats, no formal agreement has been reached yet. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said that Russia's diplomatic service will formulate proposals and implement them. He has also criticized the European Union, saying they are reviving skills in erecting new walls and further escalating tensions between nations. The Kremlin promises Russia will respond to EU's restrictions on the movement of Moscow's diplomats. EU bloc countries are moving towards a deal that would force Russian diplomats to notify member states before traveling, letting the government to deny entry. As per EU diplomats, no formal agreement has been reached yet. Meanwhile, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said that Russia's diplomatic service will formulate proposals and implement them. He has also criticized the European Union, saying they are reviving skills in erecting new walls and further escalating tensions between nations. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Professor Georgi Toloraya. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Moscow. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Professor, what is this EU's move suggesting? And it seems like EU, instead of negotiating or making a bridge between Russia and Ukraine, they're further escalating by putting up walls, just like the Russian spokesperson suggested. So what do you think this suggests? Professor, you might be muted here.
Peace. That's the difference. Hello?
Yes. Can you repeat? Can you start from the beginning? Sorry, we couldn't hear you.
This is the testimony of Europe's non-desire for peace, because the diplomats' work is to negotiate peace and to work for peaceful resolution. Military people job is to make war. The diplomats' work is to make peace. I'm a former diplomat myself and can say that it's really essential for diplomats to be able to travel at short notice, because that's what needed for negotiations, for carrying diplomatic posts, approaches, to making some urgent missions. And any limitations to their function means the desire to curtail the ability to do their job and to establish peace. This is not surprising on the part of Europe, because they want war. And well, the next step might be the expulsion of diplomats or something like this. I don't know what else to expect from these European elites these days.
Professor, now what are the potential diplomatic and geopolitical consequences of EU's proposed restrictions on Russian diplomats?
Well, the diplomatic tradition, the long-standing for centuries, have been that the counter-effect response with equivalent measures. There will mutual expulsion limitation for European diplomats in Russia, as well. So this again limits the ability for dialogue, limits the ability for understanding and analysis of the country's policies, which can lead to mistakes, which can lead to another conflict and can result in a catastrophe.
And you've also mentioned that you were a diplomat yourself. How do you see these trends in international diplomacy, and how does it compare to past instances of diplomatic isolation or travel restrictions between rival nations?
That's the worst period for diplomacy for decades, if not centuries. The expulsion of diplomats, the limitations, their ability to do their job, and again that like shutting the eyes of the governments that sent them to the developments in the host country or in their partners. It's very dangerous because it can lead to mistakes.
Thank you very much, Professor Georgi Toloraya, for joining us and sharing that insight throughout this topic all the way from Moscow. Thank you. Now we move on. The resignation of Prime Minister Sebastian Lecornu has triggered a crisis in the French political landscape, with voices across party lines putting pressure on President Emmanuel Macron. Lecornu is the fifth Prime Minister under President Macron in just 2 years to resign from the office. His resignation has immediately sparked calls for snapback elections. Former Prime Minister Edouard Philippe has also commented on this issue, urging President Macron to step down after the budget approval. Let's listen into what he has said.
Pas le président de la République à partir. Je ne suis pas pour sa démission immédiate et brutale. Elle aurait un impact terrible. Elle interdirait une élection présidentielle qui se passe dans de bonnes conditions. Mais je crois qu'il doit prendre une initiative. Et il me semble qu'il s'honorerait si par exemple, il proposait un nom de Premier ministre, il nommait un Premier ministre avec pour fonction d'exécuter les affaires courantes et de construire un budget, de faire adopter ce budget. Et qu'à l'issue, dès lors que ce budget est adopté, dès lors que la France est dotée d'un budget, et c'est indispensable, il annonce qu'il organise une élection présidentielle anticipée, c'est-à-dire qu'il part immédiatement après que le budget a été adopté.
Meanwhile, former Prime Minister and Secretary General of the centrist Renaissance Party, Gabriel Attal, has spoken about unity, noting that the Socialist Party is holding meetings to discuss the situation further. Let's listen into his statements.
Oui, vous avez raison, on vit des heures graves. Comme beaucoup de Français, je ne comprends plus les décisions du président de la République. Il y a eu la dissolution et il y a depuis des décisions qui donnent le sentiment d'une forme d'acharnement à vouloir garder la main. Pour répondre à votre question, évidemment que je participerai à ces discussions, je participerai à ces négociations. J'ai toujours participé à toutes les réunions où on m'a invité. Et si demain les socialistes, d'autres partis proposent qu'on ait des réunions et qu'on discute ensemble, je le ferai évidemment. Ce n'est pas la méthode que je proposais, mais moi j'ai juste envie que mon pays avance.
Lawmaker and leader of the Socialist Party, Olivier Faure, stated that France needs a vision and the ability to lead the country while uniting for ecological and social justice. Let's hear what he has said.
Et donc, je plaide ce soir devant vous, devant les Françaises et les Français, pour que ce changement de cap ait lieu et qu'un gouvernement de gauche puisse arriver. Nous avons déjà eu 3 premiers ministres de droite. On a un théâtre de boulevard depuis hier qui est insupportable. Des ministres qui reviennent par la fenêtre, qui ne sortent pas la porte, enfin, tout ça n'a plus aucun sens. Et donc, il faut retrouver, eh bien, tout simplement une vision, une capacité à emmener le pays, à le fédérer sur un objectif qui est simple, celui de la justice sociale, écologique.
Now we move on to the Middle East as the world marks the 2nd anniversary of the October 7, 2023 attack. Gazans reflect on the events. Meanwhile, one displaced Palestinian man has said that the world should remember the motive behind the attack: 77 years of occupation, injustice, oppression, and displacement. He further pointed out to the imprisonments, killings, and destructions faced by Palestinians over decades. Let's listen into some of the Gazans.
اليوم 7 أكتوبر وإحنا الحمد لله عايشين في منعاناة وعايشين في غلب. إلنا 2 سنين بنعاني والله عالم في الحال. يعني هينا عجوز مش متحملة حمل النار، ولا في ورق ولا في إشي. يعني حياتنا صعبة للغاية. ولا أكل ولا شرب.
اليوم سنتين على 7 أكتوبر، على حرب 7 أكتوبر. يمكن النزوح السابع لنا تقريبا. معاناة على مدار السنتين، لا حياة صح، لا نظافة، تحت القصف بترحل، تحت الموت بترحل، بتشرد أخوك بتقطع، ما بتقدرش تشيله، جارك بياكل له صاروخ ما بتقدرش تشيله، مرتك ابنك ممكن يقع ما تقدر تشيله وانت تحت القصف شارد من مكان لمكان.
يعني اليوم سنتين كملات خلصنا في الحرب واحنا في شنشطة وفي تهجير وفي نزوح، والجيش من قدامنا هي ومن ورانا الجيش والدبابات، وصحينا على خبط وقصف وطخ وطيران، والبحر هيو أمامنا، لا في شي مفر.
Meanwhile, families of hostages are calling for the release of their loved ones on the second anniversary of the October 7, 2023 attack. At Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, visitors paused to remember the attack and share their stories of loss and hope. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Dan Perry. He's a world affairs analyst, joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Dan, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this second anniversary of this heartbreaking event that took place in 2023, for 2 years, it seems like we haven't had a breakthrough. The hostages are still in under Hamas, and we do not know if they will be able to come back. How hopeful can we be as the discussions go on in Egypt?
The region is clearly at a crossroads, and there's no reason not to be hopeful, other than the fact that there is no precedent for what is on the table, which is a jihadist movement agreeing to disarm. I think we're basically at a pivot point where if Hamas agrees to the point in the Trump 28-point proposal, that is that it disarm and hand over its weapons to an interim Palestinian technocratic government that will eventually be handed over to the Palestinian Authority, well, then a lot of good things will come. The war will end. Israel's hostages will be released. The Palestinian suffering will cease. A political and diplomatic horizon will start to unfold. And, perhaps even one day, again, we'll be talking about negotiations on a Palestinian state. On the other hand, if Hamas does not disarm, I fear that Israel will have carte blanche to go ahead with its pre-existing plan to plow ahead and scale up its Gaza operations, headed towards the full takeover of the Strip, and the establishment of a military administration over the 2.2 million Gazans, and basically continued guerrilla warfare, insurgency with what remains of Hamas. And I think that is basically Israel walking into the trap that Hamas laid for it on October 7th, 2023. Hamas does not want a two-state solution. Hamas wants Israel to reoccupy the territories and for there to be one state with two ethnic groups bleeding each other to death forevermore. Hamas's goal is not partition, is not statehood for the Palestinians, is not the end of occupation, but the opposite of it. I'm not sure it would be so wise for Israel to do this, but I think that is where we're headed, and that is the current pivot point. And a lot depends on the degree to which the Arabs, and especially Qatar, Hamas's erstwhile funder and backer, can pressure them to acquiesce. And I think it needs to be remembered that 2 months ago, very usefully, 2.5 months ago, the Arab League joined the Western powers in calling on Hamas to disarm, and everything but everything depends on this outcome.
And then, building on that, what steps can these Israel and Hamas and Palestinian Authority and other Arab nations and other negotiators who are involved in the negotiation now, can they take to address both perspectives and both the humanitarian and political dimensions of this conflict?
Look, if Hamas says no and Israel proceeds, I really don't know what can be done. I mean, I suppose at that point, humanitarian aid will go in assisting Israel in running the Strip. I think more useful would be for Israel to not scale up its operations and for a whole new paradigm to be established where basically no reconstruction aid goes in, as opposed to the $100 billion that will probably go in if Hamas disarms, and the Palestinians are given some temporary refuge elsewhere, just as Ukrainians are allowed to flee Ukraine as long as the Russian attack continues. I think there's no choice but to find some way to let the Palestinians out. Maybe to the West Bank. Maybe Egypt can be compelled to take them in temporarily. If that happens, it must not be ethnic cleansing. It must be with guarantees that they can return whenever Hamas breaks. But I don't see anything good that can happen unless Hamas simply agrees to these terms. This Israeli government, I don't think will just give up. Certainly not considering that they seem to have the green light from Trump to proceed if Hamas says no. I see only a cataclysm if Hamas says no, and if the Arabs can't break their will, basically, and explain to them that no more funding, no more backing, no more legitimacy, nothing, unless they simply agree. Everything depends on this. If you ask me what the world can do if this fails, it's a bad situation. And about all I can say is what I did, let the Palestinians out of Gaza.
And since no one knows, or we do not know for certain, that what would work for this situation with Gaza and Hamas and Israel, what do you think, what can they learn or we learn from the past accord, like Oslo Accords, or that hasn't worked for this, and now the outcome is here?
So many things. The cardinal sin of the Oslo Accords is that they try to make it slow and deploy confidence-building measures over a prolonged period with a 5-year interim period that required the Israeli government to be re-elected, the moderate Israeli government of Yitzhak Rabin, during that time, which invited every extremist on all sides to try to mess things up. And the number one extremist force was Hamas, that immediately began to try to kill Jews in order to move them to the right and cause the Rabin government to fall. And that is more or less what happened. Rabin was assassinated and Netanyahu came to power. Netanyahu is an enemy of partition, the same way as Hamas, different methods, but same outcome. They both want one state, and they both think the other can be somehow defeated in a civil war in that one state, or in Netanyahu's case, oppressed. Moreover, there are lessons on both sides as follows. Israel must end the settlements in West Bank. That was poison to the system that convinced so many Palestinians to support Hamas because they thought Israel was operating in bad faith. The settlements must immediately end, and if you ask me, the settlers that are beyond the current fence line, and that means settlers that are not very close to the old borders so that they could plausibly stay as part of a slightly altered map without being in Palestine, they must be removed. And that's about 80,000 Jewish settlers that are just standing in the way of any kind of a plausible new map that creates a partition between Israel and a Palestinian entity, call it a state, but it would have to be a demilitarized state. So the settlements must end. They're simply poison in the system. On the other hand, the Arab side, for too long, has tolerated these militias, armed militias, undermining the sovereignty of a swath of countries from Iraq to Lebanon, where you had Hezbollah also messing around in Syria, the Houthis in Lebanon. It's just a disaster. The militias in the Palestinian areas, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, have badly undermined the Palestinian Authority, have made it impossible for Israel to truly have faith that Palestine won't attack them if they give up land and allow the creation of a quasi-state leading to a total state, because you have these militias. Israel absolutely gave up Gaza. They pulled out of Gaza completely. All troops, all settlers. Hamas took over in a coup against the Palestinian Authority, turned it into a garrison state, began immediately arming with weapons and long-range rockets and attack tunnels, and provoked Israel during a number of mini wars, leading to the big one, whose goal it was to have a massive war where Israel reoccupies Gaza. You can't have these militias. And the Arab world messed around with this for way too long and allowed Iran especially to undermine the sovereignty of all these Arab countries. And I believe they now understand what a terrible mistake that was. And we see that these militias are becoming illegitimate now. And Lebanon is trying to disarm Hezbollah, or speaking about it at least. But they can only do this because Israel did them the favor of weakening Hezbollah a year ago in the war. The Arab League has called on Hamas, as I said before, to disarm. These are great strides forward. And what has to happen now is a movement from merely calling for this to making it happen, and it may have to be by force.
Yes. Dan, always great hearing from you, and thank you for that insightful look on and sharing that with us on NewsX World. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Asia. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te has said that U.S. President Donald Trump should receive the Nobel Peace Prize if he can convince China to abandon military threats against Taiwan. Speaking in an interview, the Taiwanese president highlighted President Trump's previous claim that Chinese President Xi Jinping has promised not to invade Taiwan during his term. Lai has urged Trump to stay vigilant, warning that Xi Jinping continues to ramp up military drills in the Taiwan Strait and expand Chinese forces across the East and South China Seas. President Lai has stated that if President Trump were to successfully persuade Chinese President Xi Jinping to permanently end military aggression towards Taiwan, he would undoubtedly deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. The comments come as President Trump prepares for a possible meeting with President Xi at an upcoming Asia-Pacific summit in South Korea. Hours after Lai's remarks were released, Taiwan's military reported a spike in Chinese activity after 23 aircraft and drones were seen patrolling near the island, accompanied by warships. This is all we have time for. We will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world.